Looking up into the night sky may seem like a difficult task, especially if you live in the city. Bright lights and tall buildings conflict with the view of the night sky. Yet even in big cities, the brightest stars shine through, and a glimpse of the world beyond is capable. Come along and take a journey to the stars as we look at the constellations. The history of stargazing has origins in many different places. The Bible makes reference to the stars in connection to Abraham and, of course, the wise men. Many cultures have used stars for different things, whether it's fortune telling or the development of different kinds of calendars. And with the invention of the astrolabe, people were able to navigate around the world. While the history of stars helps us in an appreciation for the stars in the sky, there are many people who look up at the night sky and really don't understand everything they are looking at. As we explore the constellations, we will gain a deeper appreciation for the marvels of the night sky and the wonders of our Creator, God. We start at one of the most well-known constellations in the sky, the Big Dipper. While the Big Dipper is well known, it is actually not a constellation by itself. Instead, it is part of a larger constellation known as Ursa Major. The Great Bear is only one way to explore this constellation. Many cultures have given it different pictures. The Inuits called it a caribou. The Iroquois claimed the stars were hunters. Regardless of what the picture is, the Big Dipper is a great place to start because it can point us to many other constellations. The Big Dipper is going to guide us to our next constellation. Alright, so we're going to follow the panhandle along this little arc here, and that's going to lead us past a couple other constellations to the star Arcturus. So follow the arc to Arcturus to get to your next constellation.
Arcturus is a great name for the star, especially after following the arc from the Big Dipper. However, Arcturus actually means bear guard. You see, this star is part of a larger constellation known as Boötes. Boötes was a hunter, and while his legend rests mostly in Greek mythology, there are many cultures that built constellations around Arcturus. And those constellations also were hunters. While we've only covered 2 constellations so far, the fact that understanding constellations is really an awesome experience, but sometimes there are hidden gems nearby. Our next constellation takes us to Hercules. Hercules doesn't need much of an introduction. He can be found in many movies. Hercules' stories can be compared to the amazing events that we see in superhero movies today, but the constellation Hercules' real secret lies within his armpit. You see, in his armpit, there's a very blurry star. And while that blurry star doesn't look like much, the fact is, it's not one star, but an entire cluster of stars, because you are looking at what's known as Messier 13 or M13, which is a globular cluster, which is made up of over 300,000 stars.
From Hercules, we move in kind of an odd direction to find our next constellation, but kind of following from his head, we pass a number of other ones, but we get to a big one here that's going to help us find some really neat items. And we make our way to Scorpius or Scorpio.
Scorpio is a constellation that really looks cool in my mind and has lots of neat little features. But just like Hercules, Scorpio has lots of different hidden things that come along with its constellation. First of all, we can look at the stars inside of it, particularly one called Antares. Antares is a unique star because it is known as a supergiant. A supergiant star, compared to our sun, is just enormous and would just engulf our sun completely. And so that by itself makes Antares a unique feature, even though all we see is this tiny little dot. But along with Antares, there are often other dots in the sky nearby, and these dots aren't stars at all. Instead, they are planets. Scorpio likes to hang low on the horizon, and many planets have a tendency to appear there. One planet that really likes to appear by Scorpio is the planet Saturn, which, when it comes to stargazing, is a real treat to see, because when you look through that telescope, you get to see all those rings. As we head back to the Big Dipper, we can use the Big Dipper once again to get us to some other constellations that can help us understand the night sky. First, we're going to head south. As we line up the two stars as part of the Dipper part of the Big Dipper, we'll head south and find the constellation Leo. Now at this point you're probably looking at the constellations and saying, how did they come up with these names or these shapes? And it's true, there's a lot of imagination that needs to be brought in when it comes to looking at constellations. But once you know them, it's quite fun. Going back to the Big Dipper, we can then head north. And as we look north, we do run into another constellation, which is called Ursa Minor, so the Little Bear. But what's more important is we run into the North Star, Polaris. Polaris is a fun star to find, and it's an important star because of the unique feature of how everything seems to kind of rotate around it. And that's why it's called the North Star, because it doesn't really seem to move in the night sky, while the rest of the night sky will kind of shift and change throughout the night.
Since Polaris is that North Star, that central star, we're actually going to continue on that pathway and make our way to a second focal point that's going to enable you to see some different stars in the sky. So the Big Dipper was our first one. The second one, right, actually kind of comes in line. You can still use the Big Dipper, right? So we use the Dipper right here to find our way to Polaris right here. And then if you continue basically in that same direction, you're going to run across this W in the sky, and you're going to arrive at Cassiopeia.
Cassiopeia becomes a second focal point for finding different constellations. The story of Cassiopeia is really not that well known. However, she does play a small role in a much larger hero story. Cassiopeia is going to point the way to many known constellations that fit around the legends of Perseus. We start the history of Perseus first by looking at his horse, Pegasus. At one point in time, Pegasus might have been one of the most famous horses in the world. And still today, the Pegasus exists as a very, very famous mythological horse. It has influenced many other cultural symbols, such as Rainbow Dash, and there's even a Nike shoe called the Pegasus, which is inspired from the stories of Pegasus. But as we look at this constellation, we see a rather large constellation, and one of the larger constellations we're going to explore. Pegasus has a nice square shape that today might remind you of a baseball diamond, and in fact could be called that if we were naming constellations today. It's a nice picture to think of because this diamond shape helps us get to the next part of Perseus' story. By following the bases, we can move to find Andromeda. Now Andromeda is really the daughter of Cassiopeia, and the story of Andromeda and Cassiopeia is all about jealousy and sacrificing to their Greek gods, and Andromeda is the one who was sent to be eaten by a sea monster. But lo and behold, as the sea monster came, suddenly Perseus was there, riding on Pegasus, and they were able to rescue Andromeda. And so Andromeda sits real close to both these constellations, Pegasus and Perseus. But what really makes Andromeda important to remember when it comes to looking at the night sky is once again a big blurry dot. But this time it's not a cluster. This time it's an entire galaxy. The Andromeda galaxy is a spiral-shaped galaxy and is considered the nearest galaxy to our galaxy, the Milky Way. Though, when we talk about close, we're talking about millions and billions of light years. Finally, we get to Perseus. Perseus, of course, was a great hero of Olympus. He defeated many, many monsters, the most famous being the Medusa, and he went to battle against the gods themselves, and as a mortal he did many, many great things and hence became a hero within that mythology. This constellation kind of ends our little group, our little family surrounding Cassiopeia, Pegasus, Andromeda, and of course Perseus. As we make our way back to Cassiopeia, we can head to another constellation known as Cygnus the Swan. Now Cygnus is a really cool constellation because of its unique feature. First of all, it looks like a cross, and hence it has the second name of the Northern Cross. This of course becomes a great example, a great witness to some degree of how awesome it is to see a cross up there in the sky and the deep meaning that it has for us. Scientifically, the Northern Cross is neat because Cygnus lies directly on where the Milky Way will appear on a crystal clear night. And so you have this really unique feature that goes along with this unique constellation.
If we make our way back to Cassiopeia, we can travel to yet another constellation. We're going to head past Perseus and keep going down until we run into a very famous constellation right here.
Our last constellation has us looking at Orion. Orion is also known as a winter constellation because this is an easy one to see in the middle of winter or in the dead of winter, however you want to say it. But Orion has a tendency to kind of sit right in center view, kind of like the Big Dipper does in a large part of the year. Orion, of course, is a warrior, holds up his shield to protect, and has another mythological story that follows along with him. But what really makes Orion kind of neat is to take a look at his belt. Within the belt of Orion, there sits one little thing that makes understanding Orion so important. Because within Orion's belt is a nebula. Now, a nebula is where stars are created. So basically you just have this enormous cloud of gas, and within this cloud of gas these particles and stuff are colliding, and scientifically you have the formation of stars. Now this little gem found within Orion's belt is really a fitting way to end our look here, so we get one last really unique look at the marvels that can be found in the night sky. While there are many, many more constellations we could look at and tons of marvels to see in the night sky, our journey has come to an end.